We are here. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Lit Talk here from the Connecticut Literary Festival. I am Jotham Burrello. I am the director of the festival, and we're going to get started. I know parking is tough in this neighborhood, but we are going to start just 4 minutes late. I'm pleased to launch our first Lit Talk this evening with two terrific writers with books that we're going to talk about in Maisy Card and Christina Chiu. They're going to read for us in a few minutes, but before we do that, I'm going to just talk a little about our festival and kind of how we got here. Normally, we're a terrestrial-bound festival in October, but when the virus hit, we made plans to continue to create a literary community in the state. And now we're going to do it virtually, perhaps with no pants, but we can cast a wider net. So someone like Izzy can join us from Canada. That said, I wish we were in a bookstore. I went to a bookstore the other day in Storrs, Connecticut, near my house. They limited it to 20 people, but it was fun to go in and touch some books with gloves on and then leave. There's no word yet when we're going to return, perhaps to Real Artways. That is our host site in Connecticut. It is the coolest spot in Connecticut. It is an art gallery and movie theater. Real Artways, like all cultural institutions we know, is struggling. So please support them, and we wish them the best. We need the arts to feed our soul, and they are the heart of Connecticut. And we wish Will and his staff the best. Lit Talks is also supported by the English department at Central Connecticut State. That's where I teach and where I am a professor. So thank you, Blue Devils. Also by the Real Artways and RJ Julia Bookstore in Connecticut and the Yale Writers Workshop. I want to thank our Lit Talks producer, that is Christina Torres, and our web guru, Alexander Tremont, and the rest of our staff. This is the first of our series. I hope you can attend them. I need to mention, I have to say that the CT Lit Festival is a nonprofit organization under the umbrella of the CCSU Foundation. And this week, the university is running a giving challenge. Who thought about that? And each donation up to $500 we match. So if you spend $5 today, that's $10. That's the cost of a cheese pizza for our student staff at Tony's in New Britain. Most of the students are volunteers, and all students like cheese pizza. So we have two writers here tonight. I've read their books, and I'm hoping you too. I got to jump on my summer reading. There's Christina's book, Beauty, and there's Maisy's book, These Ghosts Are Our Family. They're both wonderful. So tonight both writers are going to read and tell us a little about their book, and then we are going to ask some questions. At the bottom of your screen, you see it says, ask a question. What you can do is you can type a question, and just like you're in an auditorium, like you pass the piece of paper up the row, we will check them out. The nice part about this, if someone else types the question that you wanted to say, and even if they don't say it as well as you would say it, you can vote for their question. It'll move up to the top of the list, and we will get to them a little later in the hour. And there's a bunch of other nifty buttons that we just can't figure out how to use, but we're trying. So we have flipped a coin in the green room, and Maisy's going to read first. I think that's what we determined. So I'm going to tell you a little about Maisy Card. She holds an MFA in fiction from the Brooklyn College and is a public librarian. Her writing has appeared in Lenny Letter, the school library journal, Agni, Sycamore Review, and elsewhere. She was born in St. Catherine, Jamaica, and raised in Queens, New York. And she earned her MLIS from Rutgers University. There's more that I want to say, and I have to scroll to find it, Maisy, excuse me. I appreciate Maisy's use in the book. I thought of various forms. It's really a novel in stories. In the New York Times, they noted that each character gives Card a fresh opportunity to play with form. Chapters shapeshift here into historical fiction and into folklore. Collective and second-person narrators feature alongside 19th century diary entries and court documents. The book is terrific. So welcome, Maisy, to our debut, and I'm looking forward to hearing your work.
Thank you. I'm going to read from the first chapter, and for people who haven't read the book, it's about a Jamaican man, Abel Paisley, who basically fakes his own death in the 1970s when he's working in England in order to abandon his family. So he actually assumes another man's identity, his best friend, whose name is Stanford Solomon, and he gets married to another woman, relocates to New York, and begins a new family and life in Harlem. And so, as Jotham said, it's a novel in stories. And I usually start with the first chapter, But I actually want to read the middle of the first chapter. It's told in second person, and you kind of are jumping in the shoes of different characters. So I'm going to read the two sections that are devoted to Abel's or Stanford's two daughters. Now let's say that you are a 37-year-old home health aide named Irene, whose father faked his own death, but you don't know it yet. Today is the day he will tell you. All you know is that he died when you were very young. You have no memory of him whatsoever. You recognize his face only as a young man in photographs. Though your mother always told you your father was timid and spineless, in one photo you remember a square-jawed man with reddish hair, face lightly freckled, dressed in a police uniform, one hand on his gun. His eyes so astute and focused it felt like they were alive and could see into you. You don't recognize that face when you meet the old man who is your new client, for his red hair is white, and as far as you know, aging after death is impossible. You do think it's strange that this man called the agency and asked for you by name. He claimed another client recommended you, which you find unlikely. You do your job, but you don't make much effort to be nice. You've lived in America for 7 years, and the only reason you came here at all, the only reason you agreed to do this miserable job in the US was to get away from your family, your brother and your mother. It seems ironic that you spend your time caring for other people's parents when you couldn't stand the thought of doing so for your own. Your husband left you and went back to Jamaica after the first month in Miami, but you stayed because you have two children who you'd sworn to keep away from the cancer that raised you. Instead, you moved to Brooklyn, where you had a childhood friend to help you. But Vera, your mother, died just a year later. Sometimes you regret not waiting. You would have at least have inherited her house if you'd stayed in Jamaica. Now you are living in a basement apartment with your two kids, working 9 hours a day, 6 hours a week, changing colostomy bags and spoon feeding strangers to stay afloat. You misunderstand the look the old man gives you when you introduce yourself. You worry that he's another pervert, that he'll sneak pinches when your back is turned, or when you're on your knees, bent over cleaning. It happens so often, you're not even surprised anymore. You are grateful that he's in a wheelchair, at least he can't sneak up on you, although it means you'll probably have to help him to the toilet. You might have to pull his pants down for him, which can lead to all kinds of undesirable propositions. You are scrutinizing his features, speculating what kind of man you have in front of you, when the image of your father, dressed in a tweed suit, too hot for the Caribbean, that he had specially made for his journey away from you, flashes in your mind, but you don't know why. It is the only photo you have of the two of you. He is standing under a mango tree with you in his arms. That tree became your favorite growing up. That tree became your father. Whenever you sat under that tree, you asked for things, and even though you rarely got them, you still imagined he could hear you. It's always been clear to you that your father's death was the dividing line between hell and heaven. Even if you do not remember much about those early days or years before he left, you know you had seen your mother smile. You carry the physical memory of being picked up and held. You swear there was laughter. Before he died, you didn't know what it meant to be mishandled, to be jerked, to be shoved, to be slapped, to be pinched, or even choked by her. You know because you remember the first time Vera did each of those things to you. Each time afterward, you sat under the mango tree and asked the man in the picture, who you thought was dead and therefore held some supernatural power, to please protect you. He never did. Today, you will finally know why. You have always wondered who you'd be, where you'd be, if he'd never left, if he had lived. You don't think you would have run away from home and down the aisle with the first man who stood in front of you. Later, after he reveals his true identity to you, if you were to accidentally let him fall down the stairs, knowing the life you've lived, a life he caused, would anybody blame you? Never mind. Instead, you are a 34-year-old heroin addict named Estelle Solomon, whose father once faked his own death. He did it before he had you, but you don't know it yet. Today is the day that he'll tell you. sometime in the late afternoon. For now, you are lying unaware on a daybed in the basement of your family's Harlem brownstone, where you've lived for the last 8 years since a judge made your parents the legal guardians of your daughter. You had begged your father to move into the garden of
Hi. I think we've lost them. Let's give them a moment. It's wonderful to be here tonight. Thank you for watching. Maisy's book is amazing. I've started reading it and listening to it while I rollerblade. It's really good. You're really going to want to buy it. Well, this is a little strange. I wish I could actually chat with everyone.
Okay, I'm back.
Hi. I told everyone how great your book is.
Oh, thank you. I actually thought you were talking to me. I thought we
I
was too.
To be honest, I wanted everyone to know how great your book was.
What happened? All right, that's exciting. All right, Maisy, you want to keep going?
All right, sure.
All right, I don't know what happened there. I get all these text messages who've been saying, "Where did you go?" I'm back.
Okay. You had begged your father to let you and Karen move into the garden apartment right above you because it has windows. But he screamed, "Is what you need windows for? Why, when you spend for your whole life asleep?" Instead, they kept your daughter upstairs with them and left you to stay in the basement. Your father seems determined to keep you alive, but just as eager to bury you. You weren't always such an embarrassment. You worked very hard to become one. You have been an addict for many years now, but before your mother died, you were also an artist. You could still hustle. You were taking and selling pictures. Occasionally, someone would put your photos on display in a cafe or a small gallery. Every once in a while, you sold something, made a little money, and even came home and gave it to your father, telling him to buy something nice for your daughter with the money your art made you. He would never take it. Worse, he would throw it down on the floor in front of you, so both he and your mother would have to watch you gather the scattered bills from all over the room. After Minna know where that money come from, Minna want know what someone like you have to do to come by it. Someone like you. He stopped short of calling you a whore for the sake of your mother, but you could feel how badly he wanted to. You have always sensed the lie behind your parents' words, have always suspected that their Jamaica was a place that did not exist. You have always wondered why they have never chosen all these years to return to that island so perfect. Instead, it was always the right weapon to throw in your face, always the only answer to their problems, their main problem being you. When you were younger, you would scream back at them that if in Jamaica, the daughters were pure, saved themselves until marriage, stood by their mother's side every day in the kitchen and watched them cook, brought their father his slippers when he got home from the store, went to church every Sunday, never refused to recite the Lord's Prayer at the table after a meal, didn't proclaim themselves agnostics, wanted to be wives instead of artists, always agreed to stack canned foods on the shelf of their father's store after school, didn't stand under the streetlights at night talking to the boys from the block, did their own laundry and their father's too, did not jump between their parents and cuss their father out every time he raised his voice at their mother, did not promise to kill their father if he dared only threatened to one day slap their mother in the face. If in Jamaica, daughters did not run away from home and return pregnant by a man twice their age, did not go out partying instead of staying home with their newborn child, did not walk down the street in skirts so short they barely covered their pum-pum, did not make their mother cry and waste away with worry, never did drugs, and if they did, were never so weak that they would become addicted. If in Jamaica, daughters were turned out of factories without the slightest defect, why the fuck didn't they just go back there and leave you alone? When your father tells you his secret, that he is not really Stanford Solomon, and therefore you in turn cannot be Estelle Solomon, that your family does not even exist, you will have your answer, and it is perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. That was true. Yay. All right. Thank you, Maisy.
Thank you,
All
Maisy.
right.
So beautiful.
Thank you.
I can't wait to talk about it.
Christina Chiu is the grand prize winner of the James Alan McPherson Award for her novel Beauty, which she's going to read from. She's also the author of Troublemaker and Other Saints, the winner of the Asian American Literary Award. It's also important to note she is a shoe designer and one of the most generous writers right now online, getting us through this difficult time. On Beauty, the writer Michael Cunningham wrote, "Beauty is beautiful in the way of a scalpel blade. It's that sharp and precise, that lacerating, that true." Welcome, Christine, to our literary talk. I'd love to hear the book.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. Maisy, that was so beautiful. And everyone, you have to buy her book because it is really good. I haven't read to the end yet, but believe me, I've read past where she has just been reading, and it's so good. It's really, really wonderful. Okay, so my protagonist's name is Amy Wong. This book was written, it covers the arc of her life. So I usually read from different sections, but I've decided I'm going to read from something totally new, and Jotham gave me a good idea, and so this is a good try at something new, and I hope you like it. At this point, she is about to get married to someone named Jeff Jones. Jeff Jones is one of the huge innovators in fashion. So she's much younger than he is. How beautiful and radiant I feel in front of the three-way mirrors. Jeff's favorite seamstress, Mona, makes the final alterations. It's the strapless wedding gown he designed just for me. It took a year to create this dress. Since Jeff Jones is getting to be a household name, he wants more than ever to push the envelope. He's certain the right dress would appear in the top fashion magazines. To his dismay, I asked for something more traditional, at least for the wedding itself. As requested, he created a modified A-line dress cut straight across the neckline, which drapes to the floor. The cut of the dress made it frightfully pedestrian, so he focused instead on the material itself. Using a lotus motif from a Chinese textile dating back to the Qing dynasty, he designed a lace pattern and had it crafted by hand. The result was stunning. Jeff was so delighted that the lace became the dress. Sheer, so sheer that a lace bra with silk edging needed to be sewn into it, and a pair of matching bikini briefs made to go with it. Most skirt lines start just above the hip, but part of Jeff's genius is to drop it mid-thigh using long layers of the thinnest Bengali muslin he could find, which drape over the lace to the floor, extending into a short train. Just below the bra line, just above the skirt line, there are strings of ribbon made of miniature flowers. They could be lotuses, but they have the innocent quality of the daisy. Critics declared that that while Jeff dares to suggest the erotic, Amy is both sophisticated and elegantly balanced with both youthful purity and ancient spirituality. Today, for the first time since the Cape Cod trip, all of Jeff's attention is on me. On this wedding gown, the one made just for me, I feel hopeful, as if I'm about to finally step into my real life. To celebrate after the fitting, I'm wearing an open gusset thong so we can fuck with the dress. Right on, if he wants. No one can tell by looking, so it's discreet and will be a wonderful turn-on for Jeff. Which reminds me, I forgot to take the pill today. However, yesterday I screwed up too. I better remember to double up tomorrow. Wouldn't want a bun in the oven while I'm tripsing down the aisle. Then again, we are getting married, and it wouldn't be so bad having a little Jeff Jones inside me, would it? Jeff circles around me, his hand brushing over the lace, indicating to Mona in a matter-of-fact manner to take it in a little bit here or a pinch over there. From my reflection, I see the dark areoles around my nipples which show through the lace. You don't think my mom would think it's too risque, do you? I ask. Chinese, especially the older generation, they can be so conservative. Of course not, he says. She knows fashion. Yeah, but all her friends from Hong Kong and Taiwan will be coming. I could already imagine the gossip. Scandalous, naked. Can you believe? Thank you, Mona, he says, now excusing her. She takes the pins from her mouth, sets them back in the box, and leaves. You have the perfect body for this, he tells me, cupping my cheeks in his palms. I made it explicitly for you. You know that. The perfect dress for the perfect body. I lean in for a kiss. I love you. You know that, right? He asks, drifting away. I love you too. Do you? His eyes tear up. Of course. He sighs, looks away. What? It's, stammers, He sighs again, moving behind to unzip me from the dress. The back opens, the lace slipping from my body. Maybe it's the central air conditioning. I shudder, automatically clutching the dress to my body. We had an argument last night. We made up, or so I thought. Can he be having reservations about the wedding? But then, why go through with the fitting? It's too confusing. Why is everything with Jeff always so confusing? 1 minute hot, the next cold, so cold. There's less than a week left. What do I tell Ma? Many of the guests had already flown in from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and the Philippines. I can already hear Ma crying. What will people think? Oh, the gossip. Heat rushes to my face. It's nothing serious, Jeff says. I brace myself. I spoke with a lawyer today, and he strongly advised, due to the complications around the company, and of course my ex, Jeff brushes a loose thread from the cuff of his shirt. He suggests we do a prenup. It takes a moment for it to sink in. We're not breaking up. Everything's still okay. I swallow, and the rock in my throat gets lodged inside my heart. There's a sudden, sharp pain, then nothing. A prenup? The lawyer was saying it's not personal, he explains. And I told him, you're not into that. You're not like that at all. You wouldn't take it like that, right? No, I hear myself say. Of course not. And we love each other, he says, which really is all that matters, right? You love me, don't you? Of course. I knew you loved me, Jeff says, hugging me tightly. I knew you were different. I knew it wasn't about the money. Of course it isn't. Jeff kisses me. I keep my eyes open. Maybe it seems he will too, but he doesn't. His eyes remain shut until he shifts back. He helps me out of the dress. I stand in front of the mirrors, naked except for the panties and 3-inch strap sandals. Jeff handles the dress reverently, clipping it between his fingers as if it's as delicate as tissue paper. He leaves to find Mona. Her workroom is at the end of the hall. I dress into my t-shirt and shirt. Jeff returns with a large manila envelope from which he produces the document. There's enough paperwork to make a book out of it. The lawyer has tagged all the places needing my signature with red posted arrows. I don't understand any of the legalese. Jeff hands me a pen. Here, he says, indicating where to sign, and here. I sign. Afterwards, Jeff tells me he has a few more things to finish up at work. If I want, I can wait. Otherwise, he'll meet me back at his apartment, and we can go to Red Farm, my favorite restaurant, for dinner. I say I'll meet him at home. I still have a laundry list of wedding errands. But as soon as I step outside into the street, I feel as if I stepped into a fog. The subway is only 2 blocks away. Everything feels too raw and yet muted at the same time. The sidewalk is crowded with people rushing home from work. Traffic's thick. A cab honks. The subway's 2 blocks away. I pass boutiques and restaurants, a yoga center, bodega, and a gym. People talk with one another. They work out, shop, laugh. I get on a train heading to my apartment, but midway, I feel claustrophobic and jump off, walking aimlessly until I find myself at the restaurant where Rick works. Rick happens to be her ex. I'll stop there.
All right. Thank you. I've read the book. I know how important that scene is. It repeats. The generous Jeff, not always. Let's talk a little about the kind of the genesis of the books, kind of where they began, kind of the impulse. I know there's a lot happening thematically in both books. And Maisy, I'll start with you. I read an interview. I know you talked about your grandfather's stories and preserving those. And then you had a line where you said, and as a member of the Black diaspora from Jamaica, whose ancestry has been affected by both slavery, colonialism, and immigration, I have to find a way to accept those mysteries, questions, and silences. Can you unpack that a little for me?
Yeah, when I started writing the book, I was in the MFA program. It was right at the beginning. I just wanted to kind of write short stories to, I guess, to preserve or kind of think through different things, different stories that my mother told me, and also different like very early memories I had from when I lived in Jamaica and also when we would go back to visit. But yeah, I think at the point where it started to become an interconnected collection about the Paisley family, I was kind of thinking more about, people in my family, like my grandfather, who was, probably when I started it, he was probably in his 80s, and he actually passed away recently. But, I was kind of just thinking about how he's made decisions in his life that at one point kind of brought us all together, and now that we're in America, it's kind of creating like a wedge. And I kind of, when you're little, you don't realize it, but as I'm older, I'm like, oh, everybody has like this serious grudge that is being exposed as we get older. And, people aren't talking to each other anymore. And my family is like drifted apart, like literally, like geographically and kind of emotionally. And so I think I wanted to kind of make sense of that through writing a novel. And also, the character Abel Paisley is kind of like a composite of several people. And I think one of them is my grandfather, who kept a lot of secrets and had a lot of children, but, had secret families when, my mother was a kid. And I didn't realize that. I just kind of took for granted that, I had all these aunts and uncles, but I didn't realize that for that, finding out that secret from my mother when she was little was like a big source of trauma for her, that nobody ever talks about at all. And my grandfather definitely doesn't apologize or never did apologize for. So I think, I wanted to kind of think about how my different people in my family felt, and try to understand like the state we were in now after immigrating to America.
Yeah. And Amy, how about you? Where's the book start for you?
I'm Christina, but Amy is.
Sorry.
I just want to be clear that Amy is.
Yeah, it's different. It's a fictional character.
I actually wrote a collection of stories. It was my MFA thesis, and one of the stories was called Beauty. And after I was done with the collection, the story, the protagonist just kind of hung on and wouldn't let go, and just kept haunting me to the point where I had to actually set aside the novel I was working, and it was no good anyway. So I finally just threw it out and started working on this one.
And can you talk then, but the theme emerges also, you mentioned before we started talking about kind of this, was it a Chinese American diaspora, and her father in the book, that's a big part of the trauma right off the bat for Amy Wong. I mean, you said more obstacles in this young woman's life. And there
are a lot of obstacles. And I would say that, the idea of the diaspora is something that I think every immigrant experiences in this country, and it's how we're actually unified, and how we actually, I don't think only Chinese experience this, but I was talking to a friend the other day about how we deal with so many stereotypes here in the US, and yet if I go back to Hong Kong or China or Taiwan, I get treated not very well because I can't speak Chinese. And people really resent that and get really frustrated with me. And because Chinese abroad are expected to continue speaking Chinese. But I was raised here where during Melting Pot, when we were all supposed to speak only English. So my parents were actually told, do not speak Chinese. And so a lot of my work really covers different kinds of stereotypes, and Amy really talks about how her life gets screwed up because her parents immigrate here, and there is a diaspora, right? And yet he's not happy when he's here, and yet they work and they struggle, and they finally achieve like this ideal living, like this American dream, right? And yet he ends up opting for something more Chinese, and this scars the protagonist for life.
Yeah.
And she never quite actually deals with it until she's a little bit older. But so it's very interesting because I think in some ways a lot of immigrants come here, and oftentimes they stay and they stick it out. But there are people who just say, forget this. I'm done. I'm out of here. And the family falls apart.
Mm-hmm. And Maisy, you had characters that, the book takes place half in Jamaica almost, half in New York City. You have some characters that leave Jamaica late, don't leave Jamaica, some stay in New York. They have the same kind of back and forth understanding of identity, and their value of who they are in Jamaica is much different than it is when they're in New York.
Yeah, I mean, I think for my family at least, like immigration didn't happen all at once. Like we kind of trickled over the years, and my mom and my my brother and I were like the first people to come, and then over the years, different family members have started to come over. And I think, it's interesting because I think how people in that time, how people see America, I feel like has changed my family. Like when, when we were young, it was like the only goal was to get to America. And now I find that my younger cousins, like Amy, like Christina, like Christina just said, it's like some people are just like give up and go back. And I've had that happen a lot recently. And I've also had a lot of younger cousins reject the idea of America entirely and just decide not to come even though they have the opportunity. But so I think there's a big divide too there's always been between this conservative way that my family who's raised in Jamaica, who stayed in Jamaica, were raised, and then the way me and my brother are, and then now this like kind of new generation too. You know, so there's just like a lot of little cultural differences that make it very difficult to kind of reconnect.
And you even have a character, Vincent, I think at one point he thinks that he's always wanted to come to America, and he comes now and he can't admit to him that he doesn't like it.
Yeah.
He struggles to find out who he is. Maisy, one thing you didn't mention in your summary or even in your reading is there's a lot of the folktale aspect of the book, the kind of magic, especially at the end of the book. Where does that come from? Are these stories? I mean, are they just folktales that you wanted to bring into the book? It makes it kind of fantastic at the end and a lot of fun.
Yeah, I just wanted to play with, you know, the idea of being haunted. Like you can be haunted in so many ways and by so many things. You know, and I think that there is an aspect of Jamaican culture that, you know, believes in silence and keeping secrets. And then there's another aspect that literally believes in ghosts. And so, you know, that's how I grew up. So I wanted to incorporate that. And I think it's, you know, if you're going to look at these characters, and if they're going to be like fully realized Jamaican characters, I feel like even whether they believe in that stuff or not, they have to engage with it. You know, and so folklore, I mean, that particular story, like there are things I grew up with, like the idea of ghosts and duppies and, you know, obia, or like this kind of like witchcraft, but, you know, that I grew up with that I always heard about. But then there are things that I read about, like stories like the old Hyde character, who's kind of repeated. That's kind of like an older story that I wasn't familiar with, but once I was like researching for the novel, I heard about and I wanted to kind of reimagine. And
these are the kind of the vampire blood moon that emerges in the book. Yeah. Amy, Christina, let's talk about Amy Wong. I'm looking at it. You know why I'm looking at my question?
I was actually going to say that what's interesting is that, you know, Chinese actually came over in waves. They came in trickles too, in part because there was a Chinese Exclusion Act that kept Chinese out of this country for many, many years. So, so my parents came in during a wave when this country had a brain drain, and they were looking for like engineers and whatever. And when after my parents came, you know, they established their lives here and whatever. And I just find it so ironic now that, you know, there's all this Trump rhetoric about anti-Chinese, and it's like, oh, so you don't want us? So it's like you wanted Chinese then, and they did all the work, and then like now it's like, it looks like a perpetual immigrant. Get the hell out.
Well, we had, again, you know, the news today, a great idea. The Dreamers, the Supreme Court allowed that to stand. That was big news today.
Yeah.
Hopefully he'll get the hell out in a couple months. So Christina, Amy has to confront a tough work environment. There's some sexism. She's not taken seriously as a designer in this world. Then she gets in the family situation. She's constantly sacrificing to get to the table. And I know you've talked about this in other interviews. Can you talk a little more about kind of this notion of maybe an influence of the Me Too movement, or this leaning in that Amy does get there? She has to be maybe patient, maybe too patient, but she does eventually ascend, so to speak.
Well, I think it's like a catch-22. You know, you're a woman. You know, you have these struggles, and if you have a family, you've got like small kids, and the idea is like, oh well, you know, if you were a strong woman, you would leave a horrible relationship, right? But it's so complicated, and if you don't financially have the means to do it, it's like it's not possible, right? So we have these expectations of women, and yet they're in this double bind, because if they leave, they're like the terrible mom. It's like, couldn't she sacrifice? Couldn't she just wait a few years? Couldn't she put her kids first, right? Like, so it's this double bind. And in Amy's case, she decides to stay. She's got this kid who's not so easy, and she ends up staying longer than she actually had wanted to. But in the end, I think she made the right decision. I mean, in her particular case, I mean, I think it's just her son needed her, and she couldn't really just leave her son with her husband.
Yeah.
Who was focused only on his work.
Right.
And so by the time she does leave him, everything kind of pivots. And I love the moment when things pivot in a story and change. And that was one of the moments in the story where I feel like, oh God, now gets to like move on and make some changes.
And if you haven't read the book, again, the way Christina structures it, it's the whole life of Amy Wong from, what is she, 16 in the beginning?
Mm-hmm.
I believe she's 70 at the end. She's a grandmother. And one of the really enjoyable parts of reading, every time you get a new chapter, you kind of have to read a little while and go, okay, where are we in her life? And you catch on, and it just accelerates. And you pick, every moment, of course, in a book, it's a tough decision for her as she eventually moves forward. Maisy, as I mentioned before, reading your book, given the context of what's happening in this country, it's pretty powerful. And there's a scene about midway through, and of course I'm talking about the protests and social justice and racial justice, and there's a scene, there's a character named Debbie. Could you tell everyone a little about Debbie, and then kind of, she's confronted with something by a curator at a museum, and she asks her this kind of key question. Can you tell everyone who Debbie is first, though?
Sure. Debbie is, she's actually the only white character in the book who's in the present day. And, the book goes back and forth in time. And one of the characters in the past is this really ruthless, like, plantation owner named Harold Fowler. And so Debbie is his present day descendant, although she grew up in America and she's not aware that she has this connection to Jamaica, because her father's from England. So she kind of, in her mind, she figures that she has nothing to do with this whole slavery thing. So her father actually gifts her a diary that belonged to Harold, who's their ancestor. And, it's very it's based on a real, diary that I started reading excerpts of. And it's a lot of brutal details about, his life as a plantation owner. And so Debbie starts to have this kind of personal struggle because she feels like the right thing to do is to make it public and, deal with her history. But at the same time, she's struggling with all the trauma that her ancestor has kind of put into the world.
Yeah, and you're right. She's told, again, you need to know this. She doesn't want to read it, of course, and then she's told she must read it. She says you have to acknowledge you can't hide it. She can't afford to be neutral, which is a line that just gave me pause. That was a powerful line, and I'm sure you wrote that line years ago.
Yeah, probably a couple of years ago now.
And these are themes you've seen in books, but it was a really powerful scene. And if you haven't read the book, I won't give away what actually happens to this journal. It's a powerful scene down in Jamaica. But do you have a sense, have you gotten feedback from the book in terms of the context? I mean, books change their meaning as we know this as we read them. Have anyone reflected or have you thought about the book and given what's happening now?
I don't know if they've talked about the Debbie, well, a little.
Well, not Debbie, but just the idea.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely the idea of this is the reckoning that's happening right now. And Debbie is struggling in that because she wants to, she wants to be an ally basically, and she wants to help people achieve closure. But at the same time, she struggles with the idea of taking responsibility. She struggles with the idea of basically white privilege is what she's struggling with. She wasn't even consciously aware of how she reaped the benefits of, that system. And so, I think why I wanted to include her too was just that the idea of this generational trauma that comes from racism is kind of different for, for people of color and black people versus people who were the colonized versus the colonizers. So, for all the black characters, it's kind of this kind of trauma is something that they kind of see in front of them that manifests itself in their lives in different ways. Whereas Debbie, she's kind of handed the trauma, the journal is the physical embodiment of trauma. Yeah. and she's not struggling with it before, and all of a sudden it's there, and she has to like learn to adjust and deal with it very rapidly. And you have to read to see if she's up to the challenge. But.
Yeah. And that's the fun part of the book too. And she's one of just this ensemble, but how they echo after one another as you build the book, the characters, which is great. You got anybody listen? You can ask. I see a couple questions. You can ask a couple questions. We'll get to them in one sec. Christina, I know nothing. I read an interview you did in the Rumpus, and you talked about how different racial and cultural point of views can inspire differences in writing as well as differences in understanding and content creation.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that line? Can you talk a little more about that? Yeah.
I said that's a really big bite.
Yeah, well.
I mean, I think culturally, people see narrative differently. Different cultures have different idea of narrative, and I was just talking to someone about this today. There's a book called The Dream of the Red Chamber. It's a very famous Chinese book. The author is considered Shakespeare, and if you ask any American, no one will know. No one will ever have heard of it or heard of him, and so every culture has its own narrative symbolisms and everything that's important to the culture, right? And I think for my book, one of the things that plays into it structurally anyway is the idea of karma. And I mean, I think for writers, it's not such an unfamiliar idea. The whole idea of plot is very karmic in many respects, but the idea, the whole structure of beauty is structured around moments in this woman's life that are on her path for personal growth and self-development, right? Like everyone has their path, and she is hopping from one stone to the next until she deals with herself, basically, and can actually achieve some semblance of freedom and selfhood, right? So that's why it's structured the way it is. Of course, I have studied with Michael Cunningham, and Michael Cunningham, one of the things that he taught me from day one was never, ever doubt your reader. Always trust your reader. And if it means you have to take out all the rubbish, like all of it, it comes out. And so that's why I left it, I kept it the way it is, even though some readers find it a little disorienting when they start the next chapter and it feels like it's another story. But for the purpose of the book, it had to be structured that way.
And you mentioned when you started, you had to realize that. I guess Michael helped you realize that to get the rubbish out of there. Was it an aha moment? You just said, "This is the way the book. I have to tell her whole life."
It actually wasn't an aha moment. It was totally horrifying, because I was in workshop the first day I'm workshopping, and Michael gave it to me. He just gave it to me. Most people get home and they start crying, right? I'm crying on the subway home. All the way home. People think like someone's died in my family, or God knows what they're thinking. I get home, and you know what? It was the best thing that ever happened to me, that Michael was honest and gave it to me and told me what I had to change. And I never made that mistake again, ever.
He's a nice guy. I've met him. He's a nice guy. He really got after you, though. He's
such a good teacher. I don't think that there are too many teachers who will tell you honestly, go there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, he is a really good teacher. I didn't have him for workshop, but I had him for a craft class at Brooklyn College.
Yeah.
Maisy, I know you said in an interview that at one point you added, towards the end of the process, you added a lot to the book. You said almost 30,000 words with your editor.
Yeah. Once, my editor started reading it, and we did a couple rounds. But yeah, like she had a lot of questions, and she wondered about like the connections between a lot of characters. So that was kind of what I spent most of the editing processing doing, just like deepening those connections between different characters, different stories, different kind of family members. And also like the timeline was a little complicated. And I think like I hadn't been like, didn't keep track in, you know, like I wasn't really that diligent about keeping track as I was writing it. So a lot of things had to be shifted, you know, to make sure that the dates lined up and different things.
Mm-hmm. I found myself going to your family tree a lot about halfway through once. And then at the end, the two, I won't give it away, the two girls at the end, I was like, okay, where are they? And then it was in reverse a little bit, that timeline too. We were kind of started in the middle and then kind of went through that family tree. We have a couple questions now. This is where I might experience here. Can you guys see the questions?
No.
You can't see the questions. Okay, I get to read the questions. All right, here is a question for both of you. Okay, here we go. A question for both of you. How do you go about creating dynamic characters? What characters of your novels did you have an easier time writing, and what challenges, if there were any, did you face when writing characters with perspectives you don't personally relate to?
I'll start. My characters really went places where I actually was not comfortable. It took a lot of telling myself, you know what, this book may not get published anyway. So why not just write it and worry about it later? And I think part of it is because I figured people would, one, assume that I'm Amy, or two, make the assumption that that the sexuality and the graphic scenes were there for purposes of like getting attention versus actually being there for a real purpose. So I was a little bit nervous that way because you can't control what other people think. You can only write what you can write, and so I had to just trust that people would realize that this was an intersectional work, and just put it out there.
Maisy, how about you?
I think the easiest characters were the characters who were based on people I know, or characters that I've spent a lot of time writing. So the Abel Paisley character, I'd been writing that character, even though he had other names back then. I'd been writing that character since like 2006. So over the years, like there's so much that I knew about him that wasn't in the book. So it was easy for me to know what he would do in a given situation. But the newer characters were a little different. Like Debbie was a hard character to write because she was very recent. I didn't spend as much time with her as the other characters. But I think, it always helps to think of, maybe that's a bad thing to do, but to think of people that you know and to kind of, try to analyze real people's behaviors and try to put that in your character.
I think also like, after, when you've been with a character for a while, you actually hear them.
Yeah.
Right. So for me, I'm working on this other novel and here she's like on my shoulder. She's like, no, and you start to hear them and they start to live with you. Right. And so, I worked on Beauty for about 14 years. So I knew her. And I think the more time you spend with a character, the more you know, not just what they look like. I think that's a mistake that a lot of writers make. They know what their character looks like, but they don't know, let's say, what a character likes to eat or not eat, or habits that they have that are quirky or weird, or moments that are dark, or things that they're suspicious of, or when you get to know that full character and spend time with them. And I think Maisy mentioned the amount of time you spend with a character really does make a difference.
We have a lot of writers out there. This is another writerly question. Got 4 votes. this is a craft writing. It says, Maisy, is there anything in particular you keep in mind when writing in second person? I know how I struggle every time I try and I don't see a second person writing, but yours was fantastic, according to Andrew Jacobs. Thank you, Andrew, for the question.
I think just the you, like keep in mind the you, and I think, you know, second person works well because of the repetition, but you have to be careful. I think after a while it could start to feel very claustrophobic. So I think I tried to find ways that when I actually used the word you, like I would, you know, I would interject it very carefully, if that makes sense. Like, you know, I wanted to find ways to make people forget that we were in second person at different moments, you know, before you brought them back in. I mean, I don't really get, because I feel like in workshop, I was always like, don't use this. People were always telling me not to use the second person, and I didn't really get why. But I think sometimes when I'm reading longer works that are in the second person, you do get a little kind of exhausted from the repetition after a while. And so, yeah, I think bringing, you know, different character names, or, you know, the way I kind of divided it up so that it feels like there's a different you know, with in every section. Yeah, I tried to combat that fatigue that comes with reading.
Handled it so well, Maisy.
Yeah. And Amy, you're the first person present tense. You know,
yeah,
that
I always say never do that.
What you love about it is, you know, everything's just moving forward. It's leaner on the page, and it's happening. And which is interesting too, is you jump time, you're in that scene in this moment of life. It makes it very vital. Was it always that way? Is that something Michael gave you some feedback on, or was that the way that?
So initially, I wrote this book in a much more conventional fashion, and I think I mentioned that before. It was written more like, you know, the typical novel, like, you know, today, tomorrow, next month, whatever, and that's how I kind of got stuck, because it didn't have the purpose and the energy that it needed to have. So I ended up, once I figured out, oh, it needs to be structured like this, then things start to flow and the stories start to come like that. And until then, it was like starting and stopping a lot, because it wasn't meant to be that kind of novel.
What type of novel?
You know, more conventionally structured kind of novel, right? You know, the way it's structured now, each chapter, it has a beginning, middle, end, right? So there's an arc to each chapter, versus, and I focused more on that, each moment versus the larger scheme, right?
Yeah.
And while the arc of her life is covered, it wasn't like the day-to-day stuff. Like it wasn't that kind of book. It was a kind of book, like when you look back on your life, you see these moments, right? Like these are the moments that you remember, versus, you know, today I had my coffee and then I went, you know, to the gym, and then I met so and so. You know, so once I realized that, that's when things started to come.
Yeah. One or two more here. This is another about characters. Do you find your characters reveal themselves as you write them, or are there times when they speak to you and reveal aspects of themselves to you off the page as well? Kind of what you were talking about a little bit. Amy?
I will say that this particular character, some of the characters from my first book were very alive for me. They had a heartbeat. They lived with me. I could hear them. You know, I could go wherever they went. Amy was one of these characters, which is why once the short story was done, it was like she wasn't done with me. and I had to finish my job,
right,
and finish her story. And you know, I had to go and do everything for her, and wake up when she wanted me to wake up, and get it all down, you know, whenever she wanted to say something.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of authors probably work this way.
Yeah, and Maisy, you have so many characters.
Yeah, but I think as Christina was saying too, there are certain characters that live with you off the page, and there are a lot of characters I think who feel minor when you're writing them, but after I guess sitting with a story for a while, you start to like them more the more times you read them. So the little girls, they were characters that I just kind of threw in, and I think in earlier drafts they're just for kind of like repetition, almost like repetition, and then I think the responses to those characters, they always stood out when I workshopped that story, and even after I was done with that story, I kept thinking about them. So I was like, so we added them in at the end as kind of, like this is what happened to them. But yeah, there are a lot of characters who, I think, I tend to just keep writing the characters until they feel like real people, like until.
That's right.
Until if a character is having a very like emotional experience and I don't feel it, then I feel like I have to keep going until I feel like what they feel, until I feel angry, or if I feel like sad, or, until I take their emotions seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it was Bernard is one of my favorite characters. And he's the one with the little girls when they appear, I think, at the wake. Is that right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I can imagine a workshopper who goes, well, where does he go with the little girls? And then you go, well, I don't know. Find out.
Yeah, and I didn't figure out where he went with them till like 10 years after I first wrote that story.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I think I know the answer to this one, but this is from Michael Barrett. About musical references in your book. This Michael is a musician. He says, I'm aware of the profound place in Jamaican music in the culture, and music became a conduit expressing pain in the system of trauma. The redemption song is the redemption. So he's curious about, is there a musical influence in the book?
I wouldn't say, I would say that there are definitely songs and artists that I thought of. I would say more like there's like one song that I mentioned, but you can't write out lyrics or whatever. But there's the Debbie story where she mentions the Max Romeo song, like Chase the Devil Away. And I thought about that song a lot as I was writing.
Yeah. Well, they're terrific books, guys. I'm sorry about our technical snafu. I don't know what that was all about, but we're learning our lessons here.
It was a ghost.
I was watching you. You did a great job, Christina. You were like, hey, everyone. You're used to this, so she can just take over. Again, the books are beauty, and the ghosts. These ghosts are family. They are phenomenal. You saw my notes. That's the writer in me. I was looking at all the things I'm going to beg, borrow, and steal from them. Thank you to Christina and Maisy, and both novels are great for summer reading. Next week, we continue on June 25th on this virtual stage with Amy Pazorski, and she will moderate AIDS Poets in the Coronavirus Age, featuring Denzel Xavier Scott, Riza Denenberg, and Michael Broder. So I hope to see you there. Safe driving home. And thank you to our guests again.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you.
Thank you.
When I hit go, we're all going to go away. But have a good night, and we'll all keep in touch. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
It.
Bye.
Bye-bye. And there'll be a recording.